bhavatu, Sahano bhunaktu, Saha viryam karvavahai, Tejasvinavadhetamastu, Ma vidvisavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May He protect us, may He sustain us. May we grow in strength together, may our study together be fruitful, and may we not hate one another. Om peace, peace, peace. So we're in chapter 3, part 2, and this is final chapter of the Katha Upanishad. So we'll read the verses we've covered already. He says, this world is like a big banyan tree that is rooted high above in Brahman, and has its branches, such as men and women, animals, insects, and plants, spread out below. The phenomenal world, is timeless, in the sense that it comes and goes again and again, like waves, in other words, in cycles. And the root of this tree is Brahman. It is pure, and they say immortal. All the worlds, including this planet, rest on it. Nothing can surpass it. This truly is that self that Nachiketa was asking about. Whatever is in this world has come from prana. In other words, Brahman associated with Maya, its own power. Again, in prana, all this rests and functions. This Brahman is like a thunderbolt about to strike. It is a great terror. Those who know this Brahman become immortal. For fear of it, Brahman, fire gives heat. Out of terror, the sun shines. Afraid of it, Indra, Vayu, and the fifth, death, rush to perform their respective duties. If anyone is able to attain the knowledge of Brahman before death, he gets liberation in this very life. Otherwise, he is born again and again in this world and other worlds. Just as a clear reflection is seen in a clear mirror, so also the self is seen in a pure mind. In the world of the ancestors, you see yourself hazily as you see things in a dream. In the world of the Gandharvas, you see the self as you see a reflection in water. In other words, again, hazily. But when you see yourself in the world of Brahma, you see it as clearly as you see light and shade. The sense organs have a separate origin in that they are products of the elements. They are active when an individual is awake. They are idle when he is asleep. A truly wise person knows that the self is independent of the sense organs, and he is therefore no longer susceptible to sorrow. The mind is superior to the sense organs. The intellect is superior to the mind. Superior to the intellect is the great self, Hiranyagarbha. Superior to the great self is the unmanifest, Avyakta. So we come now to verse 8. The Purusha, the cosmic self, or Brahman, is all-pervasive and formless, so there is no way of knowing it. If anyone knows it, he is liberated from the cycle of birth and death, and attains immortality, even when he is alive. So the Purusha is all-pervasive. Even space derives itself from it. And as it is formless, there is no way of knowing it. It is beyond thought and speech, beyond the senses. The unmanifest is Brahman associated with Maya, but without manifestation. When manifestation takes place, it is Hiranyagarbha. From the gross to the fine, that is how we progress. At first, the gross body and its organs appear to be the reality. But the mind is finer than the body and its organs, as we find that the mind controls the body and organs. Finer than the mind is the intellect. It controls the mind. Still finer is the individual self, which controls the intellect. Then finer than the individual self is Hiranyagarbha, the cosmic intellect, the first manifestation of the self or Brahman. And still finer is the unmanifest, Avyakta, which is also called a Maya or Prakriti. The finest is the Purusha, the cosmic self, Paramatman, Parabrahman, the Absolute. The goal of life is to know one's identity with this Parabrahman. When a person knows this, he is free, free even in this life. So we have the various levels of our being. We have the physical level, we have the mental level, the intellect, and if you go deeper, you discover that deeper than the intellect is what's called a hamkara, the ego, the sense of individual identity. And then even deeper, you run into Hiranyagarbha, and you discover that you're that cosmic mind out of which all things have come. And even deeper than that is what's called Avyakta, the unmanifest, which is like the creative power, Maya, before it expresses itself as the universe. And then ultimately, the source of everything is Brahman. It is the absolute, the ultimate reality. So everything in the universe has come out of Brahman, and this entire universe, with all the billions of galaxies, the billions and billions of people and individuals, this is just a little tiny drop in the ocean of Brahman. So in other words, you're speaking of something very vast, and that very vast thing is deep within your own consciousness. Because ultimately it's what you and what everybody else is. You know, as we talked about before, you have consciousness, you have awareness. That consciousness, it gets connected, identified, say, with the body, and then that consciousness becomes limited to that body, what it can experience, what goes on in its life and so forth, and it's like it's put in a very small room. And actually this is for the spiritual sages, for the realized people. For them, this human life, which we find so good and interesting, this human life is like a prison cell. In a prison cell, you're in a room like 8 by 10 feet, and within that room, you can walk up and down, you can do whatever you want. But always, after a few feet, you run into a wall. And so our human state gives us a sense of free will, that I can do what I want. If I want, I can go to work, or I can skip work, I can go to a movie. You know, like that, we think we can do anything we want. But actually, always, you're running into the wall. You're running into the limitations. If you want to know what's going downtown, well, you have to get on a train and go downtown. You just don't know, because all you know is what you're experiencing right here. And so this, you know, as we mentioned, I think last week, Swami Varadananda's example of what it would be like if you were in a room where the walls were constantly closing in on you. And he said, and this is really what human life is like. We start out, we're young, full of energy, and almost infinite possibilities. The sense that we can do anything. There's no limit to what we can do. But the longer we're in life, kind of the more narrow what we can do gets. At some point we decide, okay, this is what I'm going to major in college. This then determines what my career is going to be. And once we have a job, then every day we've got to go to that job. We have to commute, we have to do our work, whether we like it or not, in order to make a living. And like that, more and more the walls of our existence are narrowing down. As a child, all we did was play all day. We could do, you know, we had the whole world there, and we could do anything we wanted. But gradually, you know, things start to close in on us, and then comes old age, and the body falling apart, and everything else is starting to deteriorate, and the room is just getting smaller and smaller. You know, I mentioned last people that when I was in high school, I went to Catholic high school, and they had a Catholic youth organization, CYO, and so our project, one of our projects, two good projects, was to go sing Christmas carols at the old folks' homes. Well, for most of it, we were like teenagers, you know, in 13, 14 years old, and to go to this old folks home and see all these really decrepit old people was a shock. Some of them could barely sit up in their chair. And so like that, but this is where kind of we're all heading, sort of in that direction. But that applies only to the body. As long as you're in the body, like I said, you're in this very limited state of existence, which can be pleasant, which can give you some joy at times, but also can give you a lot of suffering. But that's only as long as you're identified with the body. The sages, and this started off, this is the very first thing that Yama told Nachiketa, was that there are two paths open towards man. The path of the preyas, the path of the pleasant, and the path of shreyas, the path of the good. He said the one path leads to constant limitation, constantly being reborn as a body, because constantly seeking pleasure, seeking to satisfy our desires. Oh, I want this and I want that. And so constantly we're being drawn into situations. And we find when we get what we want, when we don't have what we want, we're frustrated generally. We're unhappy. We're not satisfied. I want to get this thing. Then often you find when you want it, when you get it, you're caught up in something that may not be as happy as you thought it would be. People get into relationships. They start out wonderful, and then they find sometimes it gets difficult. Or somebody wants to get rich, so they invest in the stock market. But now, every time the stocks go up, they're happy. Every time the stocks go down, they're unhappy, and they're trapped because they can't sell when it's down, and so they get caught. People invest in real estate, and then the market collapses, and it takes 10 years to get their money back out. So like that, but we grab hold of the universe. We say, okay, I want this thing here, and then we find sometimes, it's not, didn't bring us the happiness that we thought it would, and we get then frustrated and unhappy. But when a person reverses the basis of his life, rather than seeking satisfaction, some kind of benefits, some type of improvements in his external life, in the material life, when he reverses things, begin to search within, then he begins to discover that gradually this whole infinite reality of Brahman, out of which the whole universe has come, that infinite reality is there within. And that's the source of tremendous happiness, tremendous joy. Says, Swami Varadananda again, he said it's vaster than anything you can even think of. And they say the joy that begins to be experienced at the spiritual level is beyond anything you can even imagine or dream of. That if you take your highest dreams, what's the very best thing you could get out of life? It's nothing compared to what begins to unfold within. So in the path of prayas, the path of the pleasant, where all your attention is focused on getting things out of the world, you're going kind of smaller and smaller and smaller, getting deeper and deeper and more limited as you go. But when you reverse that path, follow Shreyas, the path of the good, seeking truth, begin to question, well, who am I? What is the reality? Where is God? What is the truth of things? Then you're starting to move back out of this tremendous limitation in matter. You're starting to pull back out and uncover various levels of consciousness that are within you. And each level you uncover, it suddenly expands your whole universe. We get a little bit of that, can understand a little bit of that when you think of education. One person is totally uneducated, and he just basically eats and sleeps and goes through his daily routine and doesn't know much else. His consciousness is only aware of what's going on in his personal life. Another person has gone to college, has gone to maybe grad school, and knows things. His whole consciousness has expanded so that he's aware of other countries, of history, of science, of all these things, and he lives in just a much vaster world than the other person who's purely physical. So like that, we have the capacity to go to the library, read books, and get information, And then our consciousness, our world expands and grows and becomes something bigger than it was before. But even deeper than that is the way our consciousness grows when we start to actually go within and begin to explore what that inner consciousness is. And this is the gist of all the Vedanta and of all the spiritual teachings everywhere. When you get to the mystics and the saints in any religion, they all say the same thing. That this whole vast, infinite, eternal, wonderful reality is there, and it's your very own self. It's the reality of your very own being. So when we become selfish, it means we narrow down our vision, that I'm only concerned with what's happening to this body, with what this body gets, with what I get, what I desire, and so forth. And so your consciousness gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And it's just this one little instrument here, this one little body. On the other hand, as you begin to become unselfish, as you begin to let go of this tremendous grasp of trying to get everything for myself, as you begin to let go of that, slowly your consciousness is starting to grow back again and eventually move back to its real nature, which is the self in all. And this is the thing when they talk about self here. They're talking about self with a capital S, and from a Western standpoint, it sounds selfish. You know, the way we say, you know, in religion we're told don't build up yourself, you know, be humble and so forth. But the self, when they say self with a capital S, they're not talking about our personal self. They're talking about our real self, and that real self is the self, the consciousness within every being. Because this reality they're talking about, when they get back to the deeper levels of Hiranyagarbha, the cosmic mind and so forth, that consciousness is equally within all beings. It's experiencing the world through our eyes, through our ears, through our personal experience. It's also experiencing it through every other being, every other insect and microbe and animal in the world. It's also experiencing things through their eyes. Because it's consciousness. It's not your personal consciousness. What we call our personal consciousness is that consciousness connected with particular body, mind, personality, all these things, and then comes our sense of identity. When we begin to change our consciousness, when we begin to grow in consciousness, then instead of being narrowed down to something very small, we're gradually starting to move back into something very big. And even if we think that, oh, the world needs me, that I have to do good, I have to help people and so forth, what we can do is very small. But what the divine universal consciousness can do through us is unlimited. You know, when people, particularly in the West, when they get religion, one of the first things they do is they tend to become do-gooders. You know, they go out there and say, oh, let me help the world. And this is good. Do good and be good. These are the first kind of stages, the first steps of religion in practice. But as we go along, our intentions may be very good. We want to help people, we want to love people, and particularly we want to help our children and things, but we find sometimes we just don't know how. We don't have the capacity. But as you learn to let God, let this universal consciousness, which is the consciousness within you, but is also within the other person, when you let it function, then you see everything begins to unfold in miraculous ways. And it happens without any stress or strain or worry or frustration on your part. And this is what's known as kind of surrender to God. That as you begin to take this attitude of surrender, that there's something higher here, and I begin to let it be in charge. Instead of me and my attitudes and intelligence and so forth, instead of me being in charge and trying to do everything, I try to let this deeper consciousness begin to operate, And as we begin to step out of the way, it begins to come in. And this is the Swami Varadananda said that the final word in spiritual life is surrender. And whereas all along we got this sense of ego. And as we the sense of an individual self, and that we're in charge, we're the ones doing things, we're the ones making things happen. And even as a person becomes spiritual, he becomes a much higher being than an ordinary person, but still that sense of, okay, I'm going to help the world, I'm going to save the world, that sense of I'm going to do this is still there. But the very final kind of stage in kind of spiritual realization is a state of complete surrender, where you realize that there's this higher reality there, this higher power. It's created the whole universe, it's running the whole universe. It can handle my personal life, my little problems, it can handle very well if I let it function. And so gradually, if you're on the spiritual path, if you're gradually unfolding that infinite reality that's within you, gradually bringing it into your actual experience and letting it function. And all along that, your life will be transformed from stage to stage. So it's generally, for most people, it's very hard to kind of jump up from being a human being to being this, cosmic self or something. But in our human state, in our individual state right now, we can begin to recognize that there's something there. There's a presence there. And then as we begin to make room for that presence, to make a connection with that presence, then we see everything will start to unfold from there. As long as we shut out that presence and say, okay, I'm going to do things the way I want and have things happen the way I want, then it doesn't function. But as soon as we open up to it, it begins to come. And then you find not only does kind of wonderful things can often begin to happen in your own life, but that your inner state of your consciousness begins to become filled with the joy and the wisdom and the peace and the power and everything that's there in the divine. And then, no matter what, you find that your physical state, what kind of job you got, how much money you're making, all these things become unimportant. They don't matter anymore because you found something that's completely satisfying. You can get the most money in the world and not be satisfied, but when you begin to get spiritual unfoldment within, it brings with it its own satisfaction. And you begin to realize, yes, this is what I've been seeking. This is all I need. When you have that, you don't need what car you're driving or this or that or better clothes. None of these things are important. They're like the toys of children. That when you're a child, your toys are very important. But when you're an adult, you don't care about them anymore because you've outgrown them. So this is the idea, is that Brahman, that ultimate reality out of which everything has come, that Brahman is the reality of our own inner being. It's no different than our true self, but because we become identified with things which are not our true self, like a physical body. Physical body is mortal, is here for a while, then it goes, but the consciousness within is not that body. It's not actually affected at all by what happens to the body. And like that, as we begin to search deeper into who we are and what we are, we gradually begin to unfold kind of all the glory and the infinite kind of power and that's there. And that is what we truly are. As long as we're holding on, though, to our own personal self and our personal interest, and all our concern is with my life, then you're not aware of it, and it doesn't function. But as you learn to kind of let go of all that, and then that opens a way in which it can begin to come and be experienced. And eventually that experience becomes the reality of your being. More and more you realize that this is what really matters. What I get in my meditation and things, this is what really matters, and everything else becomes secondary. So that Purusha, that Brahman, it's there, it's all pervasive, it's not your particular Brahman, it's everybody's Brahman. And this is the part of the difficulty, is that as long as we're holding on to me and what I'm getting, what I'm experiencing, what's happening to me, then you're not aware of it. As you let go of this me focus, then you can begin to realize it, and when you truly realize it, you begin to realize that it is your own inner consciousness, but it's equally the inner consciousness in everybody else. And this actually is a kind of very wonderful experience. We live in a world, with all kinds of different people. Some of the people we like, some of them we don't like, some of them give us trouble, and like that there's always these inner reactions and things going on. But when we begin to realize that this oneself is there in everybody, and we begin to kind of function with that awareness, then you see the whole world becomes transformed. In this world, it's always called the Leela, the play of God, but it's like a drama, like a stage show going on. Each and every individual, we're all like characters in the drama, and we're playing our individual roles. So some people are playing roles of heroes, some people are playing villains, like Saddam Hussein, or people, Stalin, people like that. They're also God playing roles in this world. But when we go deeper and realize that the one self, the one reality, is playing all the roles, then your whole vision, it gets transformed, and your experience, your understanding of the world, is completely changed. And this is what we said before, that on the spiritual path, on spiritual, you don't necessarily get a whole lot of new intellectual knowledge. But what you do is you begin to get a transformation of consciousness, which means that the world doesn't necessarily change. It's the same world as it was yesterday, but now your eyes have changed. You're seeing it differently. You're seeing something completely often completely sacred, whereas before everything was just kind of ordinary. And we used the example before of how there's a rock laying by the sidewalk. Every day hundreds of people walk by it, and they say, look, it's just a rock. Then one day an artist comes by, and he looks at that rock and says, oh, it's beautiful. It has all different colors and veins and things, and he sees great beauty there. Now the idea is that all those other people, they just looked at it and said, oh, it's a rock, and they went on. Whereas for the artist, it was something that gave great joy, an expression of great beauty. Because the artist had eyes that could see it, could appreciate it. In the same way, as a person begins to become spiritual and get to spiritual consciousness, he begins to see things that other people don't. Other people just kind of go through the world. They've got their to-do list, they have other things they want to do, and they just kind of go through life without seeing things any deeper. But as a person begins to develop spiritual consciousness, he is begins to see the presence of God in everything. And with that comes a great wonder and a great beauty and a great kind of joy just to be in the world. And it's not a joy that depends on getting a certain thing, satisfying a particular desire. It's just a revelation of the underlying divinity. We have the capacity to completely shut out that divinity, to live in a world of darkness and gloom and misery, or we can open ourselves up and allow that divinity to come in, and then everything gets transformed, and we find we don't need anything. We don't need anything, we don't need anybody, we don't need society to people to like us or anything. We find that, oh, everything is fine. And so this is then the transformation that takes place, is gradually growing from our very limited type of existence, under the influence of ajnana or ignorance, of not knowing who we are, of not knowing what's going on, of not knowing what the world is, we go from that state of darkness and ignorance to gradually light and the unfoldment of reality. And this progress in spiritual life, as I said, it goes from the gross to the fine. First of all, our attention is focused on the gross physical body, and so that is the state of our consciousness. Then, as we begin to go deeper, we discover, well, there's a mind here. And eventually, some people, they discover this mind is something much more wonderful than just physical experiences. That it opens up a whole new realm of knowledge and understanding and beauty that's is much vaster, much better than just purely physical sensations. And then even you go deeper and deeper. You go to intellect and Hiranyagarbha and all these levels. And in order to kind of understand all this, we need to remember the example of creation that we've used before. That God didn't create the universe and then stick it out there like an object, like a painting or something. He conceived it within what's called Hiranyagarbha, within the cosmic mind. And it's all contained within his mind, within his consciousness. Just as the writers who's creating a novel, all the characters, the plot, the actions, everything is actually contained within his own head, within his own consciousness. In the same way, this whole universe is contained within God's consciousness, and so it's not separate from God's consciousness. The artist, he paints a painting, and then maybe he sells it, maybe he gives it to somebody or it gets burned up or something, but it doesn't matter. It's two separate things. Once he's created it and put it out, then he's done with it. But in the creation of the novelist, the creation is intimately tied up with his own consciousness, his own mind and imagination, and there's no separation. As soon as the novelist stops thinking about his book, everything disappears. That whole creation goes away. And the other thing to remember is that if the characters in his book were conscious and they begin to ask themselves, who made me? They could look at every other person, every other thing in their world, and they wouldn't find their creator. But yet all the time the creator was right there, because they're contained within the mind, the consciousness of the author. In the same way, we look at this world, we can inquire everywhere. Where is God? Who created me? Who made me? We won't find anybody or anything or any place that, yes, this is it. This is what created me. But yet all the time, the creator is right here where we are. In ignorance, we're not aware of that. And so we live our lives kind of seeking, searching for that knowledge. But yet all the time it's actually right here, because it can't be anywhere else. We can't be separate from the presence of God, but we can forget it. We can be unaware of it. It's like when you go to sleep and you have a dream. Now that at that time that dream world is real to you, and you exist in that dream world, and maybe it's a happy dream, maybe it's a nightmare. But regardless, for the time being, that world is real. In your nightmare, say you're being chased by a tiger. Seems like no matter what you do, you can't get away from the tiger. You try running and you can't run fast enough. You try climbing a tree and the tiger climbs the tree. No matter what you do, you can't get away from the tiger. But then you wake up, and now all the danger, all of the fear, all of the disturbance, it's all gone. It's not that you found a solution within the dream to the problem. It's just you woke up, and now there's no problem. Now there's no tiger, there's no dream. And so like that, when you're asleep, you're not aware of the outside world. You're not aware that you're laying in bed. You're living in this other created world, the mental world of the dream, and you're totally unaware of what is there. But then you wake up, and now suddenly you realize, oh, I'm here in bed. Everything is fine. and there's no tiger, there's no problem. So like that, we're in this world, this physical world, and we're having this, what they sometimes call the atomic dream. This sense that, okay, I'm this human being, and this world that I'm experiencing, this life that I'm experiencing, it's reality, it's the real world. And we're living in that state. And in that state, in that dream, we try to get better. Yeah, as a person, as we start to practice, begin to read about spiritual things, begin to become attracted to spiritual things, we start trying to get it better. So we meditate, we do spiritual practices, things like that. And because of that, we do get better. We have better experiences. We can have very wonderful experiences, very kind of transcendent, exotic experiences, but all of that is kind of still within the dream. Now the ultimate truth is discovered only when you wake up. And at that point, all the sense of even the spiritual seeker who's looking for God, even that's gone, and what's there is the reality, is what you are before you fell asleep, before you started dreaming, it's who you are there, and you realize when that comes that, oh, this is reality. I'm here with God, I've always been with God, nothing can ever take that away, and everything is fine. So this transformation is called realization or awakening, where the person shifts in consciousness from being in this world, kind of in the dream, struggling with the dream, and so forth, to realizing that, oh, I'm awake now and everything is fine. And so the whole infinite nature, eternal nature of God is there within us, within each person. And it's never has gone away, it can never be lost, any more than a dream can harm anything in your ordinary life. It's just an experience. It's something goes on for a while, and you experience it, and that's it. But it can never change what you actually are and what the truth of things is. And so, when a person wakes up, when he becomes illumined like the Buddha, then he's realized, oh, that was a dream. I was never this human being. I never suffered. I never struggled. I never have. This is what I am, what I've always been. And this is kind of the truth that the Upanishads, the Katha Upanishads and others, they're pointing towards. That infinite Brahman is your true nature. As a human being, like I said, we can't really conceive of it. We can conceive of getting better, of improving, of becoming a finer person, of expanding our knowledge, expanding our experience and so forth. But all of that is kind of still in the dream. But this knowledge of Brahman, this truth of Brahman, it comes from the sense of kind of waking up, of shifting from one state of consciousness to a different state of consciousness. And then everything changes. And so this is what we're kind of looking for. And the way to do that is to gradually, we draw attention from the gross, from the external world, from the physical. You begin to draw it within, and you uncover different layers within your own kind of consciousness that eventually lead you back all the way to Brahman. So then verse 9 says that the cosmic self, Purusha, is not an object of our vision. No one can see it by his eyes or perceive it by any other sense organ. It reveals itself in the heart only when the mind is pure and constantly thinks of it. Having realized it properly, one becomes immortal. So the cosmic self, referred to in the last verse, is not perceived by the senses. No one can see it or experience it by any sense organ. It reveals itself in the heart when there is great concentration of the mind, and when the heart is also pure, and when the mind is also pure. Discarding everything else as a hindrance, the intellect directs the mind to the self. The mind attains one-pointedness, and then the self, which is always within, reveals itself. This revelation takes place independent of the sense organs. When the clouds move away, the sun reveals itself. It is like that. Our desires are the clouds that hide the self. By practicing discrimination and constantly thinking of the self, our desires are dispelled. The mind then is like a clean mirror, and the self is seen as you see yourself in that mirror. So this is why we aren't aware of God, even though God is right here where we're at, is because all of our attention is focused outwards. And the thing that draws our attentions outwards is primarily desire. We see something or we think of something, we say, oh, I want to have that. And so all the time we're looking outside, thinking, oh, I want this or I want that, and struggling to get success and happiness in life. And because of that, it's like somebody standing right behind you, but you're looking in the wrong direction. And so even though they're closer than anything, and God is closer to us than anything else in this universe, then even though it's closer than anything else, you're not aware of it because all your attention is somewhere else. And so in order to become aware of it, you have to gradually withdraw your attention from all your absorption, involvement in kind of external things, and begin to look within, to search within, and then gradually begin to uncover things within, and eventually the self, which is already there in its totality, will become experienced. You'll become aware of it. I think we mentioned last week, we gave the example of the mirror, that if a mirror is completely covered with dirt, you don't see anything at all. You don't see any light, you won't see anything, you won't even know it's a mirror. And like that we experience, our knowledge comes through mind, through intellect, and which is like that mirror. Now in spiritual practices, what you try to do is to clean the mirror. And a large part of the cleaning involves getting beyond desire. In other words, our attention is going outwards. We're saying, oh, I want this, and I want this, and I want to have this, and enjoy this. And like that, we're always being drawn outside. Now, as you begin to reverse that, then gradually these desires, these intense needs that I have to have this and I have to have that, they begin to disappear. And instead something begins to come from within that gives satisfaction. And then you find gradually the desires weaken and you begin to step back into who you are. Swami Varadananda, I remember once when I first came, he said, our mother shows us pictures and we try to grab them. And this is what we're all doing in life. We're looking at the world and we say, oh, this is good and I want this. Forgetting, in the process, getting caught up so much in what's going on outside, we're not aware of what we are inside. But when we kind of let go of all this needing things and desire for things, when we start to let go of that, then we find that we start to get back into our balance. When we let go of all the different kind of things that go on in our mind, all the worries and cares and reactions and things, when we start to let go of all that, then we find there's something deeper begins to take place, and we gradually begin to sense, oh, I'm not that physical experience. I'm not that mental experience. There's something else here that I am, and that brings with it a sense of reality, that this is what I am. The sense of, okay, and with that comes a stability, strength in our nature, and it particularly becomes what Swami Vivekananda said was a sure sign of spiritual progress, was fearlessness. All fear. We're immortal, eternal children of God. All of God's power, grace, and everything else is there within us. But we get involved in this world, and like children, we become frightened by all the things that go on, what people do, what people say, and all these things. It creates a lot of fear, even though for most people, it's so kind of constant that it's just there in the background. We're not even aware of it. Most people have no idea of what actually a state of peace is like. They've never experienced. They experience a relative calm or something, but it's rare for many people to actually get a glimpse of two, kind of a peace that, oh, everything is fine, everything, but that comes only when the mind and all its worries and anxieties and this constant kind of reacting with the world, only when that quiets down for a minute can this deeper peace, which is our real self, come through. And with it, gradually, it also comes a sense of who we really are. You know, we've talked before how normally in all people, as we grow up, and particularly as we get into adolescence, we create what they call a personality, a persona. And the word persona, it comes from the Greek theater, where the different actors, they wear a big mask to indicate whether they were the hero or the villain or whoever they were. So this persona, this personality that we developed under the influence of our parents and school friends and teachers and everything else, this image that we create of ourselves and that we want people to see, this is like what we try to create and project onto the world. This image is artificial and it's very fragile, very unstable. And it leaves then people who are depending on this self-image, it leads to a great deal of insecurity. Anybody makes a remark, or they even think they may have made a remark, they get upset and worried. So it creates a lot of stress because this image, personality, what we call, is like an artificial thing that we've created with our mind and imagination, and it can collapse at any time because it's not really who we are. But when you get in touch with this deeper self, one of the signs is a sense of, oh, this is what I am. All these different things going on in the mind, you know, that turmoil and everything else, that's not me. I've touched something here which is real, and this is me. And this is as you move, kind of spiritually, you're moving into what's actually real. We can create all kinds of fantasies, all kinds of imaginations, all kinds of things in our world, none of which are true. But when you get back into your inner self, you're getting in touch with the substance, the reality of what you actually are. And then all the fear, the anxiety, this insecurity that people tend to suffer from, to the point where they have to see psychiatrists and things, all this gradually will settle down, and you start to feel just, okay, I'm okay. Remember when we read some of the accounts of people who attained realization, they all said, one of the things that almost all of them said was that there's a great sense of, oh, everything's okay. You know, there's nothing to worry about, there's no fear, there's no anxiety, it's just things are fine. And to a much deeper extent, somebody who's really become spiritual, who's realized Brahman, he realizes that things are not only fine, but they're wonderful beyond anything you can imagine. Because in that oneness, there's tremendous sense of love, of being part of this vast, infinite love, out of which the universe is taking place, the creation is taking place, is the outpouring of that divine love. And so when you become aware of that, then all your emotional needs, everything, all the problems that people have with loneliness or things like that, all those things disappear. And you find yourself just totally full of that joy. But the first thing that usually comes is just a sense of peace, of calming down, of getting steady, of not being disturbed, particularly by things. Yeah, I told before how when I first came here, back in 73, the first thing Swami Varadananda had me do was he worked in a shop in Old Town. One of our devotees had a shop there called Bombay Streetcar. Did you know Mr. Gadboli? Probably not. You did know him. Yeah, anyway, so he had a little shop there with Indian imports and little jewelry and trinkets and things. And one of the things he had there, what is fascinating, is called lucky beans. They were like little red beans, and they would have like 100 carved elephants inside. And I can't imagine anybody just carve, and then they'd sell it for like $1. Right? But anyway, we were in the shop, and so sometimes you'd get gangs or shoplifters or thieves that would come in, and you'd go through a crisis, and I'd call the police or something. But because I was staying at the center with Swami Varadananda and starting to meditate, things like that, what I found was that when one of these scenes would happen, I'd get very disturbed at the time, but it's like as soon as the person was out the door, then everything just dropped. And this is what kind of one of the first kind of stages is you realize that you have a crisis and maybe you react, you get upset about what's going on with somebody or something, but as soon as it's over, it drops away. Normally, that scene, that crisis would be with you all night long. You wouldn't be able to get to sleep. You'd keep brooding about it. But when you start to get your substance back, then things, they just drop away. And eventually you reach the point where even in the midst of the scene, you're not disturbed. This is eventually you reach this point of the sthita prajna, the man who knows his divine nature, who's aware of it, then he's not disturbed by anything. No matter what goes on, it doesn't disturb him. So this cosmic self that it's talking about, the Purusha, it can't be seen, can't be experienced by any of the senses, but this is how we're trying to always know things, always experience things, is through the senses. And then we have the mind that processes what the senses give us and try to figure it out and develop ideas about it. But God can't be experienced like that. It's only because that God is deep within ourselves, as a kind of philosophically, they say it can't be known intellectually or through reason or anything else, because it's something kind of deeper than the mind. It's ultimately not an experience. See, in order to know something, you have to experience it. You look at a chair and you say, okay, I know that chair, and you may study, you may say, okay, I know how they made that chair. I know how they put it together and things. So like that, we look at something, we see an object, and then if we think about it, we think, okay, I understand that how that object, how it works. I can make a chair if I want. But God is not something you experience like that. It's not something you can see, and all we can come up with with our mind, with our intellect, is ideas about God. And this is what tends to throw people, is that we can have wonderful ideas about God. We can study scriptures, we can know all about God, we can quote Sanskrit, we can do everything. But everything we know about God is not God. It's not the same as God. And it cannot, what God is, cannot be explained in terms that make sense to us. And this is a problem with the mystics that they run into. It's like trying to explain color, orange, to somebody who's been blind from birth. You can say, well, orange is a warm color, or this or that. You can kind of talk, try to explain, but the person will have no idea what orange is, because he's never seen it. He's never experienced it. And this is what, the mystics and people who reach this point, they say it's something that can't be expressed. It can't be put into words or because those are not yet. The Zen have a saying that the finger is not the moon. You study scriptures and all, you get the understanding, which is fine, and it says, okay, God is over there. But that's not God. It's not the same as the reality of God. It's, but it indicates, okay, this is where you look. And so the knowledge of God, the knowledge of Brahman, it comes not through the senses or even through the mind or intellect or study, but it ultimately is something that unfolds from within. It says it reveals itself in the heart only when the mind is pure and constantly thinks of it. Having realized it properly, one becomes immortal. And that's the thing, is once you get God, once you get Brahman, you get everything. That's all. So the person who's really seeking God, who really wants God, and Shankara used the example, he said, the person who's fit for studying Vedanta or spirituality, he should be like a person whose head's on fire jumping into a lake. That you should have that intensity. Once there was this guru and his disciple, and the disciple kept pestering the guru, why don't I realize God? How can I realize God? And then one day they went to bathe. Went into the river to bathe, and then the guru, he suddenly grabbed the disciple and put his head underwater, and he held him up under there until he was practically drowned. And then the guru let the disciple up, and he said, well, how did you feel? And he said, I was dying, I was desperate for a breath of air. And then the guru said, this is how you have to yearn for God. Then you'll get him. But anyway, so that's it. Like I said, the whole infinite reality beyond anything we can even begin to comprehend or appreciate, blessings beyond anything, joy beyond anything we can even imagine, all of that's available to everybody, but we're distracted. We're totally always involved in something else, and then rarely do we really kind of strive or want to realize the higher truth. And simply that the ones who have attained realization, they say, well, once you make this shift, and actually, and enlightenment, what they call enlightenment, realization of, like I say, it's not a constant result of a gradual, progressive improvement. It's something that you're asleep and then you wake up. But they say that when a person makes this kind of shift in consciousness and realizes, oh, this is what is, this is what the reality is, he said, then it's so simple, so obvious, it's so close to what we are, but somehow we miss it. We keep kind of looking in the wrong way. And this is what people all over the world, everybody's searching for happiness, and they're running this way and that, and getting this experience and that, and all the time, everything is just right there, right closer than hands and feet, closer than breathing. It's right with us, but simply we're not aware of it. And they say, well, when that awakening comes, when that understanding or realization comes, they said, oh, it was so obvious. It's always been here. But when you don't have it, then it seems like it's far away and it's impossible to get and things like that. But that's a good thing to keep in mind, is that a lot of people, most people kind of, particularly in the beginning of religion, they have this idea that God is something very far away, and I'm not worthy to go to God yet, and all these things, it seems so difficult. It seems so impossible to achieve. But yet, all the time, it's actually there. It's all right there, and you just somehow can make that shift. But it won't happen as long as you're absorbed in other things. As Christ said, that where your heart is, there your treasure will be. If all of our real interest is on what's happening in my career and this and that, and then you won't realize it. You won't want to realize it particularly. But when we see in this, we see in almost all the saints, there's this intense desire. It's the only thing that matters. They may live in poverty, they may go through persecution, they may do all kinds of, the early Christians, they were all fed to the lions and things, but they were full of joy, full of commitment, full of the realization of what they had. So like that, when that yearning for God becomes intense, then it can reveal itself. Okay, so any questions on any of this? So we're getting very near. We're in chapter 3 of the part 2. Chapter 3 of part 2, which is right the very last section of the book. And we only have about 10 more verses or so to go. Then we'll be done. So any questions then? Okay. Then we've got a retreat going on in Ganges. Swami Prasanatmananda and Swami Ishatmananda, they're both up there now. And then we have on Sunday, Swami Ishatmananda will come back. He'll do the Sunday talk here. He's doing a meditation according to the Yoga Aphorisms of Patanjali. And then we have Kali Puja is going to come up on, I think, the 2nd, which I think was Saturday or Sunday? Saturday, I think. Yeah, Kali Puja will be there. It'll be in the evening, 6:30 on November 2nd. Saturday. But then right after that, then we're into our Chicago Calling, this big program we're going to have with 50 monks and nuns coming, with devotees from around the world coming, and plus other devotees. So that's going to be from the Everybody will arrive on the 6th. They'll go to Ganges on the 7th, and they'll have a monks' conference there. Come back in the evening of the 8th, and then 9th and 10th, we have our main programs at the Hilton, downtown Chicago. And then 11th, we'll have a tour of places connected with Swami Vivekananda. This is all in celebration of Swami Vivekananda's 150th birth anniversary, which has been going on in a big way all through India and the world. And so many, many things have gone on. The University of Chicago has established the chair, Swami Vivekananda Chair of Indian Philosophy. The Art Institute has established an exchange program between curators at the Art Institute and curators at museums in India called the Swami Vivekananda Memorial Exchange Program. And like that, so many things have been going on, but hopefully this will be a very big program that we're going to have. And then after that, I guess hopefully things will quiet down. We'll see. We'll take a vacation. Om asatoma sadgamaya tamasoma jyotirgamaya Mijoimam amritam gamaya. Om shanti shanti shanti. O Lord, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light, and lead us from death to immortality. Om peace, peace,